Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar on Indigenous peoples and local communities in the IPBES Nexus assessment. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very happy to pass the floor over to Joji Carino, who is a member of the IPBES Task Force on Indigenous and Local Knowledge and a long-time supporter and contributor and leader within the IPBES process. So Joji, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and welcome to everyone. It's so good to see all our participants to this webinar. It's great when IPBES is able to hold these outreach webinars for Indigenous peoples and local communities, and this time it's on the IPBES Nexus assessment. Okay. Please choose your language in the globe below for your interpretation. And when you're not speaking, please keep your microphones off so that we can hear everyone clearly. We can hear the speakers very clearly. So we have interpretation in English, Spanish, and French. So to open our meeting, we have Gaturo Emburo of the Ngato Community Foundation. He's also a member of the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge in Kenya. Gaturo, please open our meeting.
Thank you, Joji. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you all and welcome to the opening prayer, which I will offer in Kikuyu, my local language. Welcome. Tai dadaya gaidai, gaimurungu mwene nyaga, mumbi wa iguru na thi, na indo ciothe tuonaga na iria tutonaga, we githanju kihoro, githuri kinene, mumbi wa kirima kirinyaga, kia njahi, kiri mbiruiru, ona mutamburuko wa nyandarua, thai dadaya gaidai. Tuoka nyarĩrĩ-inĩ ciaku tũnyihĩte makĩria, ithuĩ ndũrĩrĩ kuma mĩena yothe ya thĩ ĩno wombire, tumĩte Africa, Asia, Rũraya, America na Australia. Thai, thathaya Ngai thai. Twagũcokeria ngatho nĩ mawĩko maku mũtũrĩre-inĩ witũ, twagũcũnga mũhera nĩ mahĩtia tũngĩkorwo twĩkĩte magathingithia ngwatanĩro itũ nawe. Tũrĩ ngũi ciaku kuma thĩ yothe iria wĩhokeire ũmbi waku, tũteithie kwĩmenya ithuĩ nĩgetha tũrũmie ũigĩrĩrĩki ũyũ watũheire tũtirĩrĩre ũmbi waku thai thathaya Ngai thai. Tũrĩ haha ũmũthĩ tũkĩarĩrĩria ngwatanĩro ya marĩa matũrigicĩirie, maĩ, irio na ũgima wa mwĩrĩ nĩgetha tũgacĩrithie ũmenyereri wa ũmbi waku. Twakũhoya wambanĩrĩrie na ithuĩ na ũrĩkanĩrie hamwe na ithuĩ. Tũhe meciria na ciugo njega nĩguo tũtue matua ma gũkũgocithia tũkĩgitĩra ũmbi waku. Tũhe ngoro njororo nĩguo tũhote kũgarũrĩra mĩikarĩre-inĩ itũ ya maũndũ nĩguo tũtuĩke atirĩrĩri a ũmbi waku kũna harĩa hothe tũrĩ na mawĩra-inĩ marĩa tũrutaga. Twahoya maya tũkiugaga thai thathaya Ngai thai, thai thathaya Ngai thai, thai thathaya Ngai thai. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Gaturo. Okay. Here are just a few of how we will engage with the meeting. So please self-mute when not making an intervention to reduce the background noise. If you would like to pose a comment or a question, please use the Q&A or the chat, and this will be monitored. We will record the meeting with the aim of this being a publicly available resource. So hopefully this is agreeable for everyone. Okay, let's talk through the aims of the meeting. So of course, the main one is to introduce the process and the findings of the Nexus assessment. We will reflect on how these findings can be useful for Indigenous peoples and local communities. We will share experiences, insights, and concerns of Indigenous peoples and local communities around the nexus of biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change. And we will also discuss links with policymaking. And these webinars are done to support the process of ensuring that Indigenous peoples and local communities benefit from the assessment. So of course, we're very thankful for all the participants who contribute to these assessments. And this is one way of IPBES ensuring that everyone also benefits from the assessment themselves. So those are the aims of our webinar. Next. Okay, here is our agenda. We have the opening session and the introduction, which we have already done. Then we will go through a presentation of the assessment and hold a discussion. We will then have reflections and examples by Indigenous peoples and local communities who have participated in the assessment and who want to also share reflections. And again, this will be followed by a discussion. And finally, we're going to have a closing of the webinar. Okay, so for the opening words and the introduction to IPBES, we have Yesenia Hernandez, who's a member of the IPBES ILK task force. Yesenia, please, over to you.
Thank you very much, Georgie. Thank you very much for all the organizers and Padiush, and my language, it's good morning. I am very happy to be with you today after a long time of working in a very challenging assessment because linking water and health, food, and climate change and biodiversity is not easy. However, as Indigenous peoples and local communities, we always see and we always work on nexus. We see all the nature, culture as a whole, and this assessment is not just important, it's critical to us, and it's a call to see the world as an entire system that is working and all is connected. So I hope that this assessment and all the findings could contribute first to understand better how the Indigenous peoples are working worldwide and how we have different ways to work and to connect and to work under the basis of the connection between water and all the elements that the assessment includes and assess and undertake the studies and the processes. Thank you very much, and I really want to thank to all the co-chairs and authors for this great efforts to build this amazing work. And please, I would like also to invite to share, to spread all the information and the findings of this assessment, because it's very critical to promote this understanding and this linkages and work in the linkages between all the elements. And now I will pass to bring an introduction of the background of IPBES. The Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services is an independent intergovernmental body for the United Nations members. It was established by member states in 2012. We are 150 countries, member countries, and the overall objectives of IPBES is to strengthen the science policy interface for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, long-term human well-being, and sustainable development. Please, the next. Hey, Walter. Wow. One of the main functions of IPBES is to assess the current knowledge of biodiversity-related items. And what is an IPBES assessment? An assessment is a review and evaluation of existing information. We are not creating new information. including science and indigenous and local knowledge. And we work on a specific topic of them, for example, sustainable use of wild species or values of nature, etc. We work on a specific geographical area, for instance, assessment for Americas, for Europe, or we work also for a global scope with a global assessment, for instance. And this assessment is right by a multidisciplinary author group from around the world, often around 100 authors. It's a very huge task, and it's developed over 2 or 3 years. It's a long time too, but it is enough time to assess all the information that we have around worldwide. It provides a knowledge base and options for actions for policy and decision makers on all levels. The assessment produces recommendations for the policymakers and information that is critical to promote changes and actions. Next, please. Wow, well, IPBES has been a very active body because we have those assessments. In 2016, we have the pollinators, pollination and food production, and we have the scenarios assessment. And in 2018, we had the regional assessments for the different regions of the world: America, Central Europe, Asia Pacific, Europe, and Africa. We had the land degradation and restoration assessment. And in 2019, we have the first global assessment, the global evaluation of all the biodiversity and ecosystem services. And in 2022, we had the values and evaluation of nature and sustainable use of wild species. And the next year, we had the invasive alien species. And the past year, in 2024, we had the interlinkages among water, food, and health. This is why we are here. And we have the transformative change. And now we're working on the ongoing assessments in 2026, and business and biodiversity that will be presented next year. And 2024, 2020, 26, in monitoring of biodiversity, and 2025 and 2027 in special planning, and the 2025 to 2028, the second global assessment. Those are the opportunities to engage, to follow these processes and contribute. Please, next. Wow, well, now this is one of my favorite parts because we're talking about the IPBES and the ILK, the Indigenous and Local Knowledge. We first, the IPBES, the platform recognizes the importance of indigenous and local knowledge, ILK, to the conservation and sustainable use of ecosystem's. This is critical, and you can see the conceptual framework if you want to know more about this. Also recognize the importance of participation by indigenous peoples and local communities, and work with ILK is enshrined in IPBES deliverables and objectives. And of course, one of the deliverables is the assessment. And IPBES has an ILK task force, a group that work to assess and to advise, the inclusion of ILK, and a technical support unit. The head is at UNESCO with our dear friend Peter Bates. And IPBES has an approach to recognizing and working with indigenous and local knowledge. That this is our document that guides the work that IPBES is doing with this matter. And this document was approved by the member states in 2017. And we had a methodological guidance on ILK. And we're always developing and learning because it's a new approach to work and to co-producing, to work, to build knowledge based in different sources of knowledge systems. Next, please. Okay. Thank you very much. Over to you, Sister Joji.
Thanks very much, Yesenia, for also introducing IPBES and also giving your opening words. We'll also hear some opening words and an introduction to the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge that's helping to co-organize this webinar. And this will be presented by Maria Elena Regpala. Welcome, Len. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie, for the kind introduction. Tonight, we shall briefly share with you the work of the Centers of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge. The network is composed of Indigenous leaders, experts, professionals, and advocates of Indigenous and local knowledge. We are 14 Indigenous organizations from 9 countries. We promote the integrity and value of knowledge of IP and LCs in science and policy. We were organized in 2016 during the 4th plenary meeting of IPBES in Malaysia. We also build synergies with other IPLCs and institutions to widen reach and amplify our worldviews and knowledge through webinars, such as the IPLC Perspectives and Experiences on Invasive Alien Species in 2020. Next slide, please. The Multiple Evidence-Based Approach webinar in 2024, and other webinars in partnership with IPBES. Our strategies include community participatory research, intergenerational transmission of knowledge, cultural exchanges, communication, education, and public awareness, engagement at the national level, and engagement with knowledge policy platforms such as IPBES. Our ongoing work presently are in the countries of Thailand, Kenya, and the Philippines. We also have a website, the COD-Indigenous Local Knowledge.org. We also have an information management system on Indigenous and local knowledge, and we participate in the formulation and implementation of Indigenous Peoples Biodiversity Action Plan in the Philippines. We are also presently preparing for our global workshop on revitalizing indigenous food systems. We also popularize indigenous knowledge through publications. These publications are the IPLC Perspectives and Experiences on Invasive Alien Species, Sowing Seeds of Wisdom, Intergenerational Transmission of Indigenous and Local Knowledge, and we also have a newsletter entitled Indigenous Options. We engage with IPBES and the UNCBD. COD facilitates the IIFBES, or the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, during IPBES plenary sessions. IIFBES is forum of ILK holders that comes together for delivering inputs during IPBES plenary sessions. This briefly is the work of the COD-ILK. We hope that in the future we can work with you in keeping alive the wisdom of indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Len, for sharing about the work of the COD-ILK. So now we will go to the meat of and the presentation of the Nexus assessment. And we're going to invite Pam, who will be leading us through a discussion of the Nexus assessment. Pam, please. Pam Makwel.
Great. Thank you so much, Joji. I really appreciate everyone being here today. So I am going to be presenting a bit on the assessment itself, the process of how we develop the assessment and the role of ILK within the assessment. and also speak a bit about the ways in which we conceptualize the idea of the nexus. And so for our discussion about the conceptualization of the nexus, I'm also going to be joined by Paulina Karim, who is an author on chapter 1, as well as Florence Dagatan from Teteba and Lupa Pios, who's part of the IPBES IOK task force. They'll help me talk a little bit about conceptualization, and then I'll present some of the key findings of the report as well. So next slide, please. So first off, thank you to everyone for being here today and being on the call, but also to everyone who helped develop the assessment over the long 3 years that we worked on it. We had an amazing author team. We often refer to them as our family, the Nexus family. And so we really did work together so closely, and I really appreciated everybody's efforts in helping us make the best assessment that we could. So we had authors and contributing authors. We also held 3 IOK dialogues, and you can see photos of them here. The first one was in Bonn, Germany. The second one at the bottom was in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And the third one was in Montreal, Canada. And so we really appreciate everyone who was able to join us at those dialogue workshops. In addition, we have a number of groups and individuals who contributed materials either to our call for contributions or to sending in materials when authors reached out. And we also had reviewers that submitted a number of comments related to ILK throughout the assessment. And so all of those steps really helped improve and get us the best assessment that we could. So thank you to everybody who was part of this process. Next slide, please. So just to frame the assessment, the full title, we call it the Nexus Assessment for short, but the full title is the Thematic Assessment Report on the Interlinkages among Biodiversity, Water, Food, and Health. We began in late 2021, and we just concluded with the approval in December 2024 at the IPBES 11 plenary in Namibia. So we had 2 co-chairs, myself and Paula Harrison from the UK. We had over 70 contributing authors who are folks that are asked to help us with specific pieces of information. And then we really had our Nexus family team, which was 165 authors representing nearly 60 different countries. And you can see from the photo some of our author team. Many of our authors are here on the call today and will be helping me answer questions. So I appreciate all of their efforts along the way. Part of our strength was the fact that we had so many diverse participants with really interesting backgrounds across different disciplines and experiences, including authors who are themselves Indigenous. And we'll hear from a few of our Indigenous authors as part of this seminar today as well. Next slide, please. So the aims of the assessment, as laid out in the scoping report, which requested the Nexus assessment be carried out, was to really look at multi-scale interlinkages, to know that we can't treat biodiversity in isolation, but that we really need to understand how it interacts with water, food, and health, particularly in the context of climate change and the climate system, and the ways in which different and relevant aspects of our energy use also intersect with these key nexus elements. The focus was really thinking about holistic approaches to try to think of these as interconnected issues. And in order to do that, we really needed to understand the ways in which these elements or this interconnected whole was conceived of in different knowledge systems. And so, of course, part of that is assessing the state of knowledge, including Indigenous and local knowledge, on what the past trends have been, what's happening in the present, and what some possible future scenarios and trends might be. So, of course, like all IPBES assessments, we really aim to be policy relevant, to try to help inform future choices at different levels. And we put particular emphasis in the Nexus assessment on the idea of response options. These are solutions. These are things that might be policies or management actions that would help us deal with the challenges that are interlinked across the nexus elements, including the fact that we might have some trade-offs. We might have some problems trying to implement integrated solutions. And so therefore we might need some limits to some decisions or some safeguards to help us implement options, particularly around Indigenous and local communities. So next slide, please. So just to give a sense of the outline and the structure of the assessment itself, so we have the summary for policymakers that was approved at the December 2024 plenary. And I will walk through in a few minutes the SPM itself, which has 4 sections. And then underlying the SPM are 7 chapters. So chapter 1 really introduces the nexus and the concepts and the terms and the methodologies. Chapter 2 looks at the status and past trends across those 5 nexus elements. Chapter 3 is about future interactions, and so it looks at scenarios and models of the interlinkages of these elements. Chapter 4 is about policy and socio-political options for the nexus. What sort of choices do we have in front of us? Then chapter 5 was a fairly complex chapter. You can see that it was divided into sub-chapters, and so we treated it as essentially a multitude of these sub-chapters. So there's an introduction, and then there's 5 main sub-chapters relating to biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change that looked at the potential for response options that come out of each of these elements to help us deal with these interrelated challenges. And then finally, there's a synthesis section that cuts across all of those nexus areas and presents some summaries. We had a chapter 6, which focused particularly on sustainable financing, both public and private, to try to increase the availability and access and usefulness of financial resources for biodiversity. And finally, there was a chapter 7, which presented a summary and synthesis of different response options, knowledge gaps, and needs for capacity moving forward. So all of these chapters will eventually be available on the Nexus website. The summary for policymakers is available now. And I'll be talking about some of the details of the SPM in just a minute. So next slide, please. So in terms of our process, so like all IPBES assessments, we see the need and the importance of working with ILK. And so we had a range of ways to do that. So right from the beginning, we formed what we called the ILK Liaison Group. And that was a group of authors that were situated in every single chapter that would serve as champions, that would really ensure that ILK was included in each of those individual chapters and then throughout the assessment. And so as a group, we met regularly and talked about the process and how we would ensure that ILK was reflected across the assessment as a whole. That group helped us develop key guiding questions for ILK that related to each chapter. We then, of course, did our standard assessment approach of an extensive review of literature, including different types of materials related to ILK. That can include gray literature, community reports, oral histories, artworks, and so forth. We had an online call for contributions where we asked people to contribute ILK-related materials from around the world. Where we knew that we wanted to have some case studies or some text that really related to specific needs around IPLCs and ILK, we reached out to contributing authors, some of whom were Indigenous themselves, to help contribute that text. We also did some co-development, particularly of a figure that's in chapter 1 that we'll present in a minute here, through our ILK dialogues. And by co-developing, it really helped provide a richness to some of the material in the assessment, because it was something that we could do iteratively over time with some of the participants in the ILK dialogues. And finally, we tried something a little bit new in this assessment, and that was to do a cross-chapter case study. That is, every single chapter had an element of a case study relating to Indigenous food systems. And then chapter 7 in the appendix has a full summary of that case study. And it was a way to try to have a consistent theme across the multiple chapters. And we chose Indigenous food systems as the topic for that theme because they provided such a rich example of holistic approaches, ways in which food is related to health, which is related to biodiversity and water and land conservation and the impacts that that has on climate adaptation and mitigation. It was a really rich way to encompass a lot of that holistic interaction that we wanted to make sure that we had in the report. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we had 3 ILK dialogue workshops at key points in the process, particularly corresponding to public review periods. So initially, right after our first author meeting, we had a ILK dialogue to really frame the assessment, make sure we were addressing the key concepts, and that happened in June of 22 in Germany, in conjunction with the plenary that was happening at that time. We then had a dialogue in January of 2023 in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which corresponded to the first open call for review comments corresponding to the first order draft. And then we had a dialogue in November of 2023 in Montreal in Canada, which corresponded to the second order draft time for comments and reviews. So all of the reports from those workshops are publicly available. They were a really rich source of information for all of our authors, and I know I can speak for the whole team when saying that those dialogues really helped us make sure that the assessment was addressing concepts that were useful to IPLCs, that they really helped highlight for us the key issues that we needed to emphasize. And so these were just really important opportunities for us to learn from one another. And we very much appreciated everyone who took part in them. So next slide, please. So just to briefly say that the way we think about these 5 elements of the nexus was something that we spent a lot of time on in the assessment, because we know that they're interconnected. You can see the figure on the right shows that we can't talk about climate change without talking about the impacts on health and food and biodiversity and water and so forth. So on the left, we came up with this icon, which really represents the fact that biodiversity is really the heart or the fundamental base by which we enable ourselves to obtain good health, clean water, food that's healthy, and good quality. And so that biodiversity really underpins everything that we do and think about, but that biodiversity is also nested in overall climate change issues. And so you can't think about biodiversity without also thinking about the role of climate change in either affecting biodiversity and our access and our availability of resources that are tied to biodiversity, and similarly how biodiversity can help us adapt to climate change and help provide us different tools and availability of resources to help us tackle climate change. But we know this is a very, even though we're trying to be holistic and come up with this idea that these are all embedded, it still really treats these as separate issues when we know that they're not. And so it was really important to think about holistic ways of conceptualizing the nexus. And that's where we really drew on concepts of the nexus that come out of Indigenous worldviews and Indigenous knowledges. And so part of chapter 1 delved into that wider conceptualization. And so at this point, I'm going to ask Paulina Kareem from chapter 1 to take over and explain to us a little bit about this conceptualization, thinking about this holistic framing from ILK.
Yeah, thank you so much for your kind introduction, Pam, and a very good time of day to all sisters and brothers from all over the world who are joining us for this webinar. It's really amazing to see so many familiar names and faces. It really does feel like a family reunion being here. And as Pam has mentioned, for us, being in chapter 1, we had a very exciting but a very challenging task of introducing the nexus and also conceptualizing it. So we call it the nexus, the interlinkages, but we also wondered what would nexus mean for our indigenous peoples and local communities? Could we just take this concept and translate it into indigenous and local languages? Well, of course, as you can imagine, that's impossible. It's difficult to translate, and it rarely has a direct equivalent in indigenous and local languages. So this is why through our numerous discussions during the workshops in person, also during our meetings online, reviewing literature and reading the call for contributions, we actually realized that what we call nexus in our assessment for our indigenous and local partners actually means an integral whole, an indivisible linkage between these elements, between humans, non-humans, between spiritual beings, between past, present, and future, and also seen and the unseen. And we also realized from quite early on that in addition to just describing the nexus as a concept, we also need to have a very good visual representation of the nexus for our indigenous peoples and local communities as a separate figure. And so together with our workshop participants, we reflected on the meaning of the nexus in different cultures, in different geographies, and we came up with this beautiful figure that you now see on your right-hand side. We also had a support from our talented graphic designer, Andy, who made it look so colorful and beautiful. And you can find this figure as a figure 1.3 in chapter 1 of the Nexus assessment. So next slide, please. I will just say a few more words to describe and to explain what the figure is all about. So as you can see, it consists of 6 drawings, which were created by our Indigenous participants in the ILK dialogue workshops. And what it aims to demonstrate is the examples of richness and diversity of nexus conceptualizations in different cultural and geographic contexts. So you can see such countries as Uganda, the Russian Federation, Panama, Mexico, the Philippines, and the Andean region. Very wide geographic representation. We also emphasize the unique perspectives of each indigenous group and each community. So every community, every group has its own way to conceptualize the nexus. And based on the lived experiences, local environment, and indigenous cosmologies, you can see how different these drawings are. So some of them show elements of a landscape or a seascape, for example, like a tree of life of Kuna people of Panama, or a circle of life of Karamajong people of Uganda, while some are a bit more conceptual and drawing from indigenous philosophies, such as shared energy, complexity, and complementarity of Zapotec people in Mexico. So we're extremely grateful to Lupa, Paulina, Onel, Yesenia, Maria Elena, Georgie, Florence, and Kapak, to our beautiful participants of ILK Dialogue workshops for sharing their knowledge and working with us on this figure for over 2 years. And so now I come to the most exciting part of this section of our presentation, as I would like to invite the authors of 2 drawings to share the first-hand perspectives on conceptualization of the nexus in more depth. And first, I would like to invite Miss Florence, Sister Florence Daguetan, who will share the nexus perspective from the Philippines. And then it will be followed by Lupa Pius. We'll see if he is able to join us. If not, I will do my best trying to explain his part of the drawing. So please now let me pass the floor to Sister Florence.
Thank you very much, Pauline, and good evening, everyone, again. So, yeah, it has been also a privileged opportunity for us to have joined the Nexus assessment and seeing our brothers and sisters join us when we are also on the question of how do we conceptualize the nexus. And for our team from the Philippines, we reflected on and we got the example for our very concrete example of how the nexus is conceptualized by our more than of some of the indigenous peoples groups that we came to know. Is we chose the Ili or So the center part of this diagram is the ili. It is a Kankanae terminology, which actually means land and people. That's really when you say ili, it's land and people interconnected, and so that's our territory. But putting in the people is very also important. We believe that land is life, so and the elements that compose the life is of course the water and the elements of nature that are very important in our lives. So in the perception of the people in the land, it's not just the surface land, it's below and above and the underground and the bios and the above ground. So it all encompasses that the land plus the water. And our perspective is that we view the nature and land as part of our body. And we develop our knowledge system and value system to see this as interconnected and that we should take care of it. And that is reflected in our values, in our customary laws, and the norms and the knowledge and practices on how we manage our territory. So, yeah, because it also encompasses the nature, because then we have to rely on what's the appropriate timing for when to grow our crops and when to fish and when to hunt. So these are all also the nature and health. And so that's how we see the interconnectedness of or the nexus as our concept of research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear Sister Florence. So now, yeah, I was told that unfortunately our next presenter, Lupa Pius from Uganda, he was having some technical difficulties and he's sending his excuses, so he's not able to join the webinar. So please allow me to just briefly explain his beautiful drawing and what it is representing. Of course, not as good as Lupa could have done that. So this drawing was created during the second ILK Dialogue workshop in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And we saw Lupa working on it for several hours. You know, he was not paying attention to anyone. He was just focused. And so he created this vision of Karamojong people from Uganda representing a circle of life. So which connects pastoral communities, forest and crop communities, and fisheries communities. And you can see that his drawing actually draws from the landscape that he comes from. You can see the animals, the birds present here in the picture. And of course, indigenous peoples and local communities and their knowledge and traditional practices are at the very center of this circle of life. And what we call the 5 elements of the nexus, biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate, they're actually an intrinsic, they form an intrinsic part of this circle of life. So completely connected and completely holistic. So we were very grateful to Lupa for this beautiful drawing and for sharing his knowledge with us. And now, please let me go to the next slide. So you might have noticed that despite the differences in various conceptualizations of the nexus by different communities, different geographies, there are actually many common concepts that cut across these various views on the nexus. And so we tried to arrange them in the very center of our figure, in this purple color that you can see here on your right-hand side. And we categorized them in the following 5 categories, such as spirituality and rituals, relationality, reciprocity and responsibility, self-determination in caring for land and waters, sustainability, adaptation, innovation and resilience, and temporality, intergenerational wisdom, and language. And I stop here on purpose because the importance of language and its diversity as a part of biocultural diversity was actually emphasized again and again, not only during our workshops, but also during external peer reviews. So we understand that language is absolutely crucial for conceptualizing the nexus. And this is why in our chapter 1, we developed a separate table to demonstrate examples of representations of the common concepts relevant to the nexus within different indigenous and local languages. And we're extremely grateful to all co-authors of the nexus assessment and our LK workshop participants who have shared their knowledge with us. So now we are proud to have 93 examples from 12 indigenous and local groups from different parts of the world. And for those of you who are interested to learn more, please do see our table 1.1 and appendix 1.1 in chapter 1 for more information. And finally, I must also mention that we are planning to develop a paper, a publication about the conceptualization of the nexus, and we sincerely hope to invite all amazing people who have contributed to this work to become our co-authors. So I will stop here and I will pass back to Pam. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Paulina and Florence, for this really important part of the assessment. So I'm going to present some key messages from the summary for policymakers, and I'm aware that we're running a little bit over time, and I want to make sure that we leave plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through these. Please, if you have questions, we'll have some time in the Q&A, and we can go back and to dig into these messages in a little bit more depth. So next slide, please. So the summary for policymakers, as I mentioned, has 4 key sections. And so section A really talks about the past and current nexus interactions. What's the sort of state of the world right now? Section B is around future nexus interactions, and it's informed by thinking about models and scenarios, maybe to 2050 or even beyond. Section C is about response options, so possible solutions that will help us address nexus interactions. And then finally, section D is about governing the nexus. How do we actually change the way our financing and political systems work so that we can achieve just and sustainable futures for all? So you can find the summary for policymakers online at the URL indicated here. So let me go through quickly some of those background messages, particularly relating to ILK and IPLCs. So next slide, please. So section A, as I mentioned, is those past and current interactions. So next slide. So one of the key things that section A does is set up the current state of knowledge across those different nexus elements. And we really focus on how important biodiversity is. It really underpins all of the other elements. It helps us regulate the climate. It provides sufficient and clean water. It helps us sustain our food systems by regulating pests and pathogens. It can help improve our physical and mental health. It can help provide both traditional and modern medicines. And it's really fundamental, biodiversity is, in terms of supporting cultural identities. So if we lose all of the elements of biodiversity, we have incredible cultural losses as well as losses across the nexus elements. And so section A really talks about those declines in biodiversity that we've been experiencing for the last several decades. So next slide, please. So we know that the burdens of biodiversity loss do not affect everyone equally. And so it's important to point out that there's disproportionate impacts, particularly on developing countries, small island developing states, and indigenous peoples and local communities. So when we lose biodiversity, those are the communities that are most affected. We know, for example, that illegal and unregulated resource extraction, such as mining, can cause serious impacts in many indigenous territories. And we've got some case studies in our underlying chapters about the harmful health effects, for example, of mercury from illegal mining. We know that when biodiversity loss happens, we also see often losses of language and culture that accompany the loss of biodiversity. And so we want to point out that those issues are interlinked. We also point out in the summary for policymakers that when indigenous peoples and local communities are excluded from research and decision-making and funding, trying to deal with biodiversity loss, that compounds the problem. And so we need to treat this as a holistic issue and make sure that the people who are being disproportionately impacted are also the people that are able to make decisions. So next slide, please. So we also point out that even though they are disproportionately harmed by biodiversity loss, even though there are exclusionary practices that keep IPLCs from accessing funding and research, we know that IPLCs successfully conserve biodiversity and sustainably manage other nexus elements. And so we want to point out how important that role is early on in the summary for policymakers. And so we talk about how ILK is fundamental for making those sustainable decisions. And it really supports arguments that IPLCs need further recognition as rights holders and to make sure that they are included in decision making, and particularly around funding, that they're able to access funding for biodiversity conservation and other nexus elements. So we spend some time in the summary for policymakers highlighting the need for holistic approaches and the need for recognition of IPLCs and their important roles. So next slide, please. So then section B is about the future. So next slide. So section B really relies on analysis of scenarios and models. And the team from chapter 3 did an amazing job of collecting a large number of scenarios and models, over 180 different ones. And they looked at them, particularly in the context of the degree to which these models and scenarios were able to either include in the process Indigenous peoples and local communities as participants in modeling and scenario building, or the degree to which these models and scenarios reflected their needs and interests. And interestingly, of the scenarios they assessed, only 8% included ILK systems. And so we know that that's a major gap moving forward. We need to have better representation of ILK in our scenarios and models. So, but interestingly, for those scenarios that do show positive outcomes across the nexus elements, so going forward to say 2050, where we see positive outcomes for biodiversity, food, water, health, and climate, we see a couple of key things. One is that those scenarios show that when multiple values and knowledge systems are recognized, we get more positive benefits. We know that when we pay attention to injustice and inequality and we try to correct for those, we also get positive benefits. Those scenarios and models that showed inclusion of practices of IPLCs and making sure that they weren't excluded from the resources of biodiversity, we also see positive benefits. And those scenarios and models that are attuned to the potential for risks of harm, particularly around things like climate mitigation efforts that might involve wide-scale afforestation. We cannot do that when it involves risk of harm to livelihoods of IPLCs. And so our models are very clear about that, even though we know that there are some knowledge gaps within those models themselves. Next slide, please. So then section C of the SPM really talks about response options or solutions that we can bring to address nexus interactions. Next slide, please. And so a lot of the possible things that we can do relate to the ways that IPLCs are already managing resources holistically. And so a great example of this is Indigenous food systems. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But we also have an important response option of rights-based approaches. This is ensuring that there are recognitions of IPLCs as right holders in decisions around everything from protected areas to water management. And that helps ensure the full and effective participation of IPLCs in co-designing, coordinating, and implementing those response options. That everybody needs to recognize the important role that IPLCs play and build those into our decision-making processes. The next slide, please. So we also talk about the fact that response options can strongly help us advance our global policy efforts, such as the SDGs or the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework or the Paris Agreement. So a great example of this are Indigenous food systems. So one of the response options that we looked at. And so these Indigenous food systems reflect the reciprocal worldviews and values that IPLCs hold. They are based on sustainable use of biodiversity and not having an artificial division between biodiversity and food supply. The food supply is often very healthy. It's sustainable. It helps contribute to biodiversity conservation as well as climate change mitigation and adaptation. And these indigenous food systems help us meet SDGs and GBF targets. That's really important. So when they're recognized and when they're supported and when they are provided with more funding and capacity, they can help us meet those global targets. So they're not just, we shouldn't just consider them local benefits. They really do help us meet our global goals. And similarly, agroecology, which is an approach to blend science together with ILK within food systems, that as a response option also helps us meet many of our global goals as well. And so those are just two of the response options that we highlight within the summary for policymakers. So next slide, please. So another thing that we talk about in terms of response options are ways that we can improve area-based conservation, particularly around aligning values of multiple actors, recognizing full and effective participation of IPLCs, ranging from co-designing those area-based conservation strategies to governing them, rooting those in rights-based approaches, and ensuring that there's full effective sharing of the multiple benefits of conservation. And so we give some examples of marine protected areas in Chile and Australia, for example, where there have been multiple benefits that have been distributed in fair and equitable ways. So next slide, please. So promoting rights and equity is a key theme throughout the SPM, and particularly in the section C. But we point out that we need to scale that up. We need to extend it to more places, and we need to ensure that there's support, whether it's financial or capacity or technical or otherwise. Those rights-based conservation approaches to whether we're conserving water or we're conserving biodiversity or trying to do climate mitigation, those rights that are related to access and management of natural resources, including land tenure and resource rights, are absolutely crucial. This can also include recognition of the rights of nature. This was another response option that we looked at that can be quite effective. And we provide an example in the SPM from Brazil, where there has been a move towards formalizing and recognizing tenure rights for many of the Amazonian-based IPLCs, which has resulted in very demonstrable decreases in deforestation and increases in forest restoration. So those tenure rights are absolutely fundamental for recognizing and supporting IPLC's roles in area-based management. So next slide, please. So then the final section of the SPM is really about larger governance questions and financial and economic questions. So next slide, please. So one of the key messages is that our current system is not fit for purpose, partially because it treats these as individual siloed problems. And so we really need to move governance towards more integrative, inclusive, equitable, accountable, coordinated, and really adaptive approaches. And that's going to provide benefits both now and into the future. And we call this nexus governance, to try to treat our governance systems as a holistic whole. Next slide, please. So we know, however, that that idealized vision of nexus governance is going to encounter some barriers. Many of those barriers to collaborative action are particularly acute for IPLCs that often may lack the power, agency, and resources to act. And so we need to focus on capacity building and skill strengthening, improving enabling conditions, and these include financial and incentive mechanisms. And that means reforming our financial systems, making sure that those IPLCs that are guardians of so much of our biodiversity and our forest resources have more access to climate financing, to biodiversity financing. We want to increase actor engagement through different mechanisms of coordination and knowledge production. We want to ensure that happens in the context of FPIC procedures, though. We need to have those safeguards in place to ensure that equity can actually happen. And so recognition of human rights-based approaches, consideration of equity and justice, these are all parts of nexus governance. Next slide, please. So as part of assessments, we also indicate where there are gaps. And so the assessment has a table on gaps in knowledge. And we know that we need more information about IPLC managed systems, the ways in which they can be valued in both monetary and non-monetary ways, particularly when we're talking about increasing access to funding streams and scaling up those contributions. So we need more work, particularly around property rights and traditional rights and how those interact with financing mechanisms. I mentioned that so many of our scenarios, only 8% really treat ILK effectively. And so we need better, more participatory scenarios in the literature. And we also need more response options that are grounded in ILK that really highlight IPLC cultural practices and innovations and ways that those can be scaled out and up into new areas. So next slide, please. So this brings us to the Q&A part. I know I went very quickly through some of those key messages, so please let us know your questions about those. We've got a dynamic team that's available to answer. So in addition to Paulina, who you've heard from before, we also have Anna Paula from Chapter 1. We've got Pradeep and Sylvia from Chapter 2. We've got Brenda from Chapter 3. And then from Chapter 5, which has those different sub-chapters, we have Francisco from the food chapter, Maysoon from the food chapter, we have Pablo and Miriam from the health chapter. And then from Chapter 6, which is around financing, we have Walter. I don't know if Kamal was able to join us. It's quite late in Australia. But we've got a dynamic team that's ready to answer questions. And I know we've also got some of our Nexus authors that are participants in the larger participants list. So we appreciate their being here as well. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Willie, who is going to facilitate our Q&A. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Pam and Paulina and Florence for the presentation. We have 4 minutes for the Q&A. So you're welcome to write down your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. And we have our authors and the members of the ILK to monitor the questions. So who wants to go first? Maybe I should start. I have a question here. How was the ILK concept of the nexus able to influence the other chapters?
Great question. Well, maybe I'll ask some of our chapter authors if they want to talk a little bit about how ILK was brought into their chapters. So Francisco, I see your hand up, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, in our chapter, there are 2 main elements of contributions from ILK. One is the conceptual part, which some of it I'm going to present next. And the other one is some information from indigenous knowledge inserted in the chapter. But the complexity of the chapter doesn't give enough room to contribute a lot more than it's already there. So I see this as a process. The next Nexus assessment will probably have much more interaction with indigenous knowledge. Thank you for your question.
Thanks, Francisco. Are there other questions? There's one here. From Ariadne Iris. How's the Nexus assessment related to the socioeconomic needs of the indigenous peoples?
Great. That's a great question. That's something that Chapter 2 spent time focusing in on. And so maybe Sylvia or Pradeep want to chime in here in a minute. But one of the things that Chapter 2 did was what they call the hotspots analysis. And that is to look globally at where we see the biggest challenges in terms of declines in biodiversity, increases in impacts from climate change, food insecurity or water insecurity, and health problems. And so it was a spatial analysis, which really took indicators across those 5 elements and overlaid them globally. And one of the things that the hotspots analysis showed is that areas that are inhabited by IPLCs are often areas that are experiencing one or more of those challenges, particularly related to perhaps food insecurity or water pollution. And so it really highlighted the need to pay close attention to those socioeconomic needs that IPLCs have, because they are experiencing at disproportionate levels some of the negative impacts of biodiversity loss or lack of clean water. So Pradeep or Sylvia, do you want to add to that?
So, yes, thanks, Pam. So maybe about the hotspot analysis, as you mentioned. So apart from that, we also did some systematic review in the chapter 2 with concern with the drivers, direct and indirect drivers, which are affecting these different nexus elements. So we found like a lot of negative indicators, negative impacts across all these nexus elements was there. So these has a direct linkage with the socioeconomic aspects. And also we found some, as Pam mentioned, about disproportionate trends for all these nexus elements across the different regions. So which in generally in apprehension or perception, which we might not think that, oh, okay, for example, food in Africa, we might be not getting that much positive trend or that much negative trend, but we found something, the trends which were not in perception in general, but that was very intriguing and insightful. So yeah, I think so. Overall, what Pam mentioned is the crux from the chapter 2 as far as ILK is concerned. And all these nexus elements has a socioeconomic relations and the livelihood, and then the knowledge systems which are coming from them, but they are not getting benefited by those, like IPLC themselves are not getting benefited by most of the development plans and things. So of course, yeah, this is very briefly. Maybe Sylvia, if you want to add something more.
Thank you, Pradeep. Yeah, as Pam and Pradeep have said, we also noticed that most of these developmental projects, they are introduced in the local areas where the indigenous community do live, and this extraction of minerals and other extractives from the land also impact the local community. So we found that they are negatively impacted by developmental programs, and the policies in several countries do not consider the indigenous knowledge. So the trend is declining the IPLC impact on the nexus elements, but now most of the government do not consider the role of these indigenous people. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you. I'm afraid that's the we have run out of time for to respond to some of the questions that we have here in the chat box, but I understand the authors will continue responding to these ones. So we'll now have to end this Q&A portion, and I'll pass you on to Joji. Thank you.
Hey everybody, perhaps Joji's not able to come back on the line. Yes.
Oh,
Oh, you are there. Okay, great.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry,
Joji.
I didn't unmute and open the camera. Yes, so now we have an interesting panel of reflections and examples from our indigenous authors. We have Kamal from Nepal, who's addressing biodiversity, Francisco from Mexico, who's addressing food, and Mariam Abubakrin from Mali, who will be talking about health. So I'd like to invite Kamal first to make your presentation, to your reflections. Kamal, are you around? I hope you are.
So it's me again. Kamal was saying they were having some power outages, so I know he was in and then he was out and then he was back again. So perhaps we move to the next one and then we can see if he's able to rejoin.
Okay, I think the next one is Francisco around the food.
Yes, thank you. Can we have the slides up, please? Thank you. Well, thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Peter. Let me start. It was in the late 1980s when the use of food systems as a concept started. The result was a significant change in how food production and consumption was conceptualized. The concept of food systems is related to systems theory and systems thinking, the two epistemological pillars that sustain the concept. Next slide, please. Von Braun defined food systems as, in 2021, food systems encompass the entire range of actors and their interlinked value-adding activities involved in the production, aggregation, processing, distribution, consumption, and disposal of food products that originate from agriculture, forestry, or fisheries, and food industries, and the broader economical, societal, and natural environments in which they are embedded. This definition was mostly the result of a scientific way of knowing. However, the report that von Braun et al. presents arguments that open the door for broadening the understanding of the concept. For instance, they recognize the diversity of food systems, including agribusiness as well as small-scale agriculture. Additionally, they acknowledge that food systems are not just technically functioning, but are embedded in values and cultures that need to be considered when systems transformations are proposed. The definition proposed by von Braun et al. Does not reflect clearly an indigenous people's perspective. Thus, it is important to understand how indigenous peoples think and conceptualize their food system. Next slide, please. Let's explore briefly the case of the Yucatec Maya people. A Yucatec Maya farmer starts its food system by choosing a forest, clearing, burning, building a house, and planting multiple crops around it, introducing animals and different ways of producing food. After 3 to 4 years, a home garden replaces the milpa. Areas of medicinal, ornamental, fruits, vegetables, and trees for construction are established. Then it is time to start a new cycle for milpa in a different location. Next slide, please. A new cycle begins. This time the focus is mostly on staple food, a milpa with maize, beans, squash, and many other annual species. After about 3 years of farming in the same area, the farmer chooses a new area and starts a new cycle again. This process goes on for 20 to 30 years, depending on the local conditions, until the initial site is cleared and burned again. All this process is considered by the Yucatec Maya as a family individual food system. Next slide, please. The hard work of a Yucatec Maya farmer. Next slide. Get stuck. We need slide number 5. Thank you. The hard work of a Yucatec Maya farmer and the family reaches a complex set of components and subcomponents of the individual family food system. This table shows that there are about 6 components and several subcomponents in the design of a Yucatec Maya food system. Altogether, the number of species managed is in the hundreds, and it does not include the number of varieties for each species. It is not easy to imagine the huge knowledge needed to sustainably manage so many species in so many components of the Yucatec Maya food system. All this biological diversity is sustained by the culture, which includes their own ways of knowing. Next slide, please. There is an additional level of knowledge and understanding the Maya food systems have, and that is the territorial level. This slide shows the state of Quintana Roo, Mexico, my home state, with dozens of territorial divisions. Each division represents an ejido, which is the name used in Mexico for most of the territory in the hands of local people. In an ejido, the land is of communal property. An ejidatario has the right to cultivate a piece of land for as long as he or she wants and is approved by an assembly of ejidatarios, which also has to authorize the clearing of a new area. This social organization forces people to know very well their territory, allows everyone to know what each farmer is doing in the same territory and the impact on their natural resources that affect all. Unfortunately, the social organization of community land use is changing. More and more ejidos are embracing privatization. Privatization is closely related to changes in the food system, from traditional to using green revolution techniques for food production. Next slide, please. The great diversity present in the Yucatec Maya food system clearly reflects the thinking behind its design and management. This figure represents how Yucatec Mayas see and think about their food system. A food system means not only food or nutrition, but also health, nature, and livelihood. The knowledge and care for medicinal plants and nature are always present in the thinking behind the planning of each planting season. The aim is to achieve a well-being state at a family and community level. Next slide, please. Using the 10 elements of agroecology, in 2023, FAO published an organization of those 10 elements, showing how they interact and how interdependent they are. The elements are diversity, synergies, co-creation of knowledge, resilience, culture, efficiency, recycling, human and social value. These 8 elements organized in a matrix have 2 outcomes: responsible governance and circular and solidarity economy. Based on research on Yucatec Maya food systems, we know that these 10 elements are present in our food system, but the organization is different. Next slide, please. This figure shows the organization of the same 10 elements from FAO, but the starting point is different. The thinking in the Yucatec Maya culture rests their food systems on individual, family, and community values. The other end, governance, coincides with FAO. The difference is the circularity between the two ends, which is not present in FAO's version. Next slide, please. Here are side by side the 2 ways of organizing the same elements. On the left is FAO, and on the right is the Yucatec Maya. Each organization represents the differences in thinking, the differences in world vision, in cosmogony. In the literature, it is mentioned the role of spirituality in the indigenous people's thinking. The realm of values includes the interaction between the living and the non-living components of nature at work. Next slide, please. This slide shows side by side the definition of food systems from Von Braun and the progress we have so far in the understanding the thinking behind the Yucatec Maya people. The idea is not to compare 2 ways of thinking and decide which one is better. The idea is to figure out how to build bridges between 2 different cultures. The idea is to develop effective ways of intercultural co-creation of knowledge. The premise is that intercultural co-creation of knowledge has the potential to face more efficiently the many challenges in transforming unsustainable food systems. Having better understanding of the thinking behind the design and management of food systems from indigenous people's point of view helps to develop concepts and methodologies that can facilitate the process of intercultural co-creation of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for that wonderful presentation of a real nexus in the food system. We will have our next presenter, and this is Mariam. Hello, Mariam, and you will be talking to us about health.
Hello, Georgie. Nice to see you, and congratulations on your prize. I didn't have the opportunity to meet you. That's really a prize that we all as Indigenous peoples welcome in recognition of your work. Talasam in my language, greeting. I would like to thank everyone who have been involved in this assessment, directly or indirectly. As the team has presented it, people highly contributed. We created a family throughout the time that we were developing this assessment, which is one of the more relevant assessment for Indigenous peoples, as we are seeing and looking and developing and moving toward interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health, trying to tackle them and address them in a way that we are moving from siloed approaches to more interconnected and integrated approaches to biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change. Also, as Pam has reminded us that all this is also interrelated to climate change. So I will bring you to some of what we call the response options, which are solutions. Mainly the one on integrated health education from our chapter. Because education need to be, and everything start from that. Like when we are delivering health services, it all starts from education, but also from the perception and how the institutions where the health care are provided. So in that research in that response option, we looked into making space for diverse cultural perspective to widen how we can think and come with innovative solution and approaches within our nexus assessment. So one of the key elements is really to educate health professionals and the public based on diverse knowledge systems, including the indigenous ones, and from new health teachings and practices institutions. And in that, I mean all the intercultural health, and I will come back on it in the third part. We also moved, like we saw as a very promising solution, focusing on ecological responsibility in the health sector, because the health sector is heavy. It's really having heavy impact on biodiversity and climate, thinking of all the operationalization of the health sector, thinking also on how life expectancy is being longer now, and what that means as impact on biodiversity, and how then the health facilities can be taught in a way that we think also on the impact on biodiversity, and also the relation with the other health, like the animal health, but also the biodiversity health, coming with a more holistic approach that can be called One Health, Eco Health, or planetary people health. And then that really requires transformation, as I said, with the mixed approaches, both in education, but also in thinking the health facilities and how we provide healthcare through healthcare systems, needing what is called, and I put it in bracket because this is not a concept that is highly welcomed by all indigenous peoples, the intercultural health, meaning that we have, and this is well defined in our chapter, formal arrangement between the health department and traditional health practitioner that enable inclusive, equitable, and culturally relevant healthcare for indigenous peoples and local communities, and are informed by diverse knowledge systems. So, and I will come with a very concrete example. In our traditional indigenous communities, the first responders are not is not the conventional health system. We have our traditional healers where people go to visit first. For most of the usual health issues, and those people are for us the primary healthcare providers, and the public health system has really lot to gain in working with them and involving them in the state health system. So this is a way just from actor or stakeholder level, a big gain. And when we grow up this, or if we advance in seeing public health issues, for example, zoonotic diseases, they also become very important because they can be the ones monitoring first any spillover, any new outbreak. So they are also important, not only as providers of primary health care, but also secondary in tackling the One Health also. So this is an example. Next slide, please. So integrated health educations make a space also for the holistic approach to health and well-being, which Pam also has shared with us how this has come as a solution within our assessment. So it's emphasizing really on the interlinkages and interdependence between people, biodiversity, including animal and environment. And in some of our case studies, we had from my own people and language and word conception, the concept of aramet, which is a state of well-being shared by the environment, animals, and humans. So this is reflected in one of our books and more developed. We also have, as she said, referring to Pam, food case studies across all the chapters. In one of our food case study, the one in the health chapter, we have this quote from a study that was made with the Inuit people in northern Canada. For Inuit, achieving food and nutrition security is about more than ensuring people are free from hunger. It is about the right to harvest and pursue a traditional subsistence way of life. In other words, Inuit view food security as a right encompasses the cultural and environmental aspect of their lives. It also you could see here in the picture that was kindly shared with us in the context of that of our assessment by the Inuit Circumpolar Council archives in Canada, a Ninook hunter who just caught a Arctic shark, and they explain it to us that there is a worry also on the impact of climate change and the pollution on the food they are eating, having the question of is the food I am eating is healthy, and so we could see directly the interlinkage between food and health, beyond the fact that food is also in providing the nutrient, but it's also having impact on, as we saw in the quote, and a way of being also connected to nature. So the mental, spiritual power of the food. So this is really where our that case study is stressing on the need of transformation of the health sector entirely. Next. And this is an example of how this can be really functioning at the bringing, like moving to new or indigenous or integrated health frameworks where relationship with nature, and as we say in as indigenous peoples, Mother Earth, but also keeping the stewardship and the responsibility that we have with over element of Mother Earth. Like we are, for example, eating the food, which is medicine for us, because it is bringing us our vitamin, our micronutrient, the protein, the glucid we need to be healthy, beyond all the emotional and the spiritual power of food. But we have to also think of biodiversity as a some as we are part of this cosmology, right? We are part of it, and we could see here a work that has been done in the context of a project I co-lead with more than 100 indigenous peoples across the 7 sociocultural regions. And we could see the Aramet concept that I introduced to you in my first slide, and that is explained in the chapter 5.4, the health chapter. So you could see the centrality of the concept of being healthy as people, being healthy with Mother Earth and with environment and biodiversity and with other species. And we could see the determinant that the indigenous people who was involved in this work has identified as important to reach out to this state of health and well-being shared by people, animal, and other element living and non-living upon Mother Earth. So this is the way forward for our nexus, and to think integrated interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health. Tanemer.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Indeed, it's so great to hear from diverse systems and understand how interculturality and linkages are so important. So we hope Kamal is with us now, who will be sharing on biodiversity, human rights-based biodiversity.
Thank you very much, and good evening and namaste. I'm coming from Nepal. Based on this, the assessment, we have able to bring the human rights-based approach in the biodiversity. Human rights, the principle to need to be the conservation and other measures, the rights of nature, not only the human right focus in the assessment, also they highlight the rights of the natures. The recognizing the indigenous rights of indigenous peoples and local community of women means this the women from indigenous peoples and local community have a right over the land and territory. I put the map based on these outcomes. We can use this the information to make our territory or land map. Actually, I use this doing in my work in the during my community work. If so, we can also monitor the very beautiful animal red panda. It is the threatened species, the red list species in our territory. That is the right-based approach. Give us the do our work maybe in future work at the MBSHAP or in the KMGBF target 3 in ITT. That's what we are trying to do in Nepal. The water and food and health and safe and clean environment is a kind of the human rights approach, closely linked with the UN REAP. Land and territory rights is our collective right, our the ancestor. Next slide, please. Further, the ILK has a diverse, not only the mono is diverse within the community, within the region, within the country, within the global. That's needs we also have a right to have a free power informed consent. It has mechanism. We need to be clear and bring more. It has system, it has function, how it's governed, and we also have the principle to transfer or hand over to our young generation to make continue for the biodiversity conservation and customary sustainable use. So we have a customary land tenure, traditional territories, where the biodiversity, forest, waters, and food, culture, rituals, and practice. That means the right over the land and tenure is very, very important. They recognize recognize indigenous initiative. If there any kind of initiative that's our indigenous peoples, our local communities are practicing. That should be in the human right based approach. So the right based outcomes of the IPBES assessment should be to good tool to implement the NBSAP in country level. That's the something our right based approach come up the sharing, and thank you very much.
We can't hear you, Joji.
Yeah, it's question and answer time. How many minutes do we have? We only have 4 minutes left. If you have questions about the 3 presentations, a lot of questions have already been answered in the Q&A box, and you can actually continue asking questions, and I'm sure the authors will respond to this. But in the last 4 minutes that we have, maybe I can ask this question. I still have time. Thank you, Francisco, Marian, and Kamal. My question is, how do you think governments can better engage or can better be engaged in nexus approaches with IPLCs? How can our governments be better engaged?
That's a great question, Willie. One of the things that we talked about a lot when we were considering this idea of nexus governance is how do we move the existing really siloed systems towards this more holistic approach, learning from IPLCs, engaging with them. And so one of the things that the SPM and then Chapter 7 talk about in particular is we present this idea of a roadmap in the sense that there's process steps that we could take to be more inclusive and collaborative and adaptive and all of the things that we want within Nexus governance. And so the roadmap is a sort of visual of how we might do that. And so we talk about it different steps. We need to make sure, for example, before any decisions are taken, we need to have all of the rights holders in the room. right? We need to have safeguard processes along the way. We need to have collaborations between scientists who are asking certain questions and Indigenous knowledge holders who are asking a different set of questions. And so we like to think of the roadmap as a nice example of a process that could do what you've just asked. And we've actually, in some of the uptake events we've had over the last few months, we've presented this idea of the roadmap, and we've heard from places that are actually trying to use it now. So we want to maybe come back and answer your question in a year or two and see if it actually has helped, if it actually has opened up some space. And so maybe we'll do a follow-up webinar and we can give some examples of where it worked, I hope. But I see Francisco and Miriam might have some answers as well.
Yeah, and if you can do that in 2 minutes, Francisco and Marianne. Thank you. Francisco.
Go ahead, Mariam, please. I can go next.
Okay, thank you so much, Francisco. I think adding to what Pam has said, and thanks for your question, Willie. One of the things really be after having the roadmap, like it's really to have an opportunity as ILK to be in the in the plenaries, like in the meetings where the governments are, to be able to share with them that roadmap, like explaining what it means really to involve Indigenous peoples, bringing to them those case studies, what your state is gaining, what the humanity and biodiversity are gaining by having those actors in place, those knowledge systems contributing and valued as such. And also beside in the, for example, IPBES plenaries, CBD COPs, but also having them at the regional and country level, having some workshops locally at the regional level, thinking from my region of Africa, like having something side to one of the biggest rendezvous of African states, that will be really something that will bring it to the attention of the governments. Thank you.
Thanks. That would be great. Francisco?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I hope that my comment will not create much more controversy. And I think a very good approach to this great question that you have posed, Willie, is understanding that there are fears among different people from different cultures. For instance, a scientist trying to work with Indigenous knowledge fears that the knowledge that the Indigenous people have is not strong enough. Indigenous person fears that the scientists will not understand her cosmogony or way of thinking. So I think we have to think about ways of bridging these different cultures, ways of putting away those fears. And I think that one really good way to go about it is thinking about this intercultural co-creation, intercultural co-understanding issues, intercultural co-creation of solution of those challenges. So I'll leave it there. Thank you. I know there is controversy on the word of interculturality, blah, blah, but I'd be happy to discuss it more if we have time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We'll continue the discussion soon in the future. Yeah, so may I now invite Georgie and Pam for the final reflection? Thank you.
Joji, you're muted.
I keep muting. Following up on Francisco's point, we need also the nexus of knowledges that comes from the nexus in biodiversity, health, water. So it's so great to bring our thoughts together. And I certainly learned a lot. So I'm very, very thankful also for all of the everyone who brought this assessment together. It's really excellent work. Thank you very much. Pam, please.
Great. Thank you, Joji, for the kind words. Yeah, thank you so much for all of the questions today. I think they really highlight the hunger for knowledge about how we change the systems that we have. And so some of the thoughtful questions around how do we increase financing? How do we make sure that we recognize that not all IPLCs agree on visions? How do we make sure that we have, as Francisco was saying, these intercultural approaches? How do we bring in what Miriam and Kamal were talking about in terms of the diversity of understandings of our problems? I think all of these are things that we tried to tackle as best we could in the Nexus assessment. We recognize that sometimes trade-offs are inevitable. We can't solve all problems in a holistic way, but the important thing is to recognize those trade-offs, to make them with conscious knowledge. Like right now, we often treat impacts on IPLCs as externalities, right? There's something that happens later, and we need to get out of that mindset, right? It needs to be making sure that people are represented as rights holders in these discussions from the very beginning. And so that's really fundamental to having that sustainable, holistic approach across our Nexus elements. So it's about people, it's about processes. It's not just about the ways in which these elements intersect, but it's really about how people bring their experiences and their understandings to our potential solutions. So thank you so much to all of our authors. I think you could tell from the presentations today that we really had such a diverse author team, and we're so thankful that they spent time with us over the last 3 years. And particularly thank you as well to everyone who was part of the ILK dialogues. And I hope everyone in the presentation of the conceptualization that Paulina and Florence talked about, you can see the benefits of those ILK dialogues. That was real co-production of different knowledge systems together, and it made the assessment so much better. So we're so appreciative of everybody's work on this. And I think at this point, I'll turn back to Peter for some next steps and upcoming activities.
Great. Thank you so much, Pam and Joji. I won't spend long on this, but just to let you all know and to remind everybody that this is really just the beginning of a process. When the assessment is finished, it's kind of some of the hard work is done, but then the idea is that the assessment takes on a life of its own and really becomes a tool that people are working with and discussing, and that's influencing policy and decision making for many years to come. So from our side, the immediate next steps, as we've said in the chat, the materials for Indigenous peoples and local communities will be made available online. The English version is already there. We put the link in the chat, but there will be French and Spanish and other languages to come. And we really encourage you to look at that document, and that really shows what the decision makers and the member states in the IPBES plenary agreed to. So those are those are messages that hold a lot of weight if you do want to use them in negotiations or education materials or funding applications and so on. We're also planning a webinar in July looking at the intersections between policy and Indigenous and local knowledge around the Nexus assessment and around the transformative change assessments. And also around some of the past assessments, looking at best practices and good examples. So we'll be sending more information about that when we bring that together. And then also the Nexus authors and others who are involved in the assessment will be obviously taking part in different meetings, different conferences over the next years to also be spreading the word. And if you do know of a meeting or a conference or some kind of event that you're holding where you would like somebody to speak or to present some of the ideas here, then you're very welcome to contact us, and we're very happy to make those connections so that the word on this assessment and its important messages and its important demonstrations of what might be possible can be spread even further into the world. And then in this other blue box, we just have some of the other IPBES activities that are coming up, which is more for your information. So we have a workshop on scenarios and ILK coming up next week in the Philippines with Joji and Len and others and Willie. So we're looking forward to that. Then we'll have workshops for the new, the ongoing IPBES assessment of monitoring of biodiversity, for spatial planning and ecological connectivity. We'll be starting up the second IPBES global assessment, which is a really important assessment for Indigenous and local knowledge. It has a separate chapter entirely on Indigenous and local knowledge, which has been set as chapter 2. So the idea of that chapter is that it's going to set a whole framework around Indigenous and local knowledge, which will then inform the rest of that second global assessment. So that's a really exciting piece of work that we'll be starting at the end of this year. We're also going to have a workshop on Indigenous and local knowledge methods. So we'll be sending out a call for participant nominations for that. That's going to be taking place around November. And then the business and biodiversity assessment, which is taking place at the moment, will be ending at the end of next year, and that will go to plenary. And then next year, we will be having a webinar and materials and other discussions around that assessment, which has also had a lot of important work around Indigenous peoples and local communities. As you can imagine, it's a very important one for that subject. So that was all I wanted to say on the next steps. So I think then, I don't know if Joji, you want to pass the floor? Thank you.
Yes, we have Simon Mitambo from the Society for Alternative Learning and Transformation, also in Kenya, to give us the closing prayer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgie. And everyone, I want us to take this moment to just take a pause after all these discussions, just to experience where it is taking us. I want us to just remember that we have been discussing the elements, sacred elements of nature. Water is very sacred in our communities. And we want also to thank the spirit that comes with the water for cleansing. And also food is very critical in our offerings to our ancestors. We want also to appreciate those who bring food to us. It connects us also with the ancestors. When we eat and commune, we come together. So we appreciate the ancestors that come with the spirit of water and food. To the health that we discuss also is about our well-being and our relationship with Mother Nature. It's not only about physical, but also spiritual. When we are balanced in our physical, spiritual, mental, is that when we can talk of health. So we appreciate the spirit that live within our health, and it was from balance as we live for this meeting. Also, when we talk about biodiversity, we talk of spaces within our environment where we find our sacred natural site, for example, where we find sacred trees, where we commune with nature. So we take this moment also to appreciate those spirits and those qualities that come with that. We also take recognizance of the places where we are standing now, and also appreciate those people who lived there, who lit fire there, who walked there, who swam in the waters there. We want also to appreciate them and recognize them in our midst. We appreciate those who walked this journey that we are here, those who came before us, our mentors. We know them, they left us, some of them. We bring them also within us as we consolidate our thoughts and the discussions that we have had. And to all the ancestors of the great creation, those who were there since time immemorial, the sun, the moon, the stars, the rivers, the mountains, we bring the energy in our consolidation into this meeting. To all that, we give thanks and praise. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing a very nice close to this webinar today. Thank you, Simon. I think with that, we've come to the close of our webinar. I'm sure everyone learned a lot, and we indeed are a bigger family now, a bigger Nexus family. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been
Thank
great
you.
seeing all of you.
Thanks to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much,
Thank
everybody.
you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to see you all. Bye. Thanks,
Thank you
Pam.
all.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Joji, Paulina, for nice presentations.